Are the comments still bad? Okay, yeah, they're still bad. There are 5 universal constants of which to be knowledgeable of. Change will forever be a difficult process for everyone. Letting go of your childhood is even harder, my terrible upload schedule, and above all, there will always come a point every few years where certain cartoons quickly worm their ways into the minds of people outside the target demographic. Mucho texto, what's important is that I know this because I've gone through all of them, including that last one.
So, does that make you...
just a watcher, a viewer. I'm not in the demographic though.
That's not to act like it isn't normal to like a cartoon as an adult, especially ones that regularly keep their adult audience in mind. That's nonsense. As it's been stated time and time again by many people in your lives, most likely your parents if you click on this video having not subscribed to me, growing up doesn't necessarily mean you have to let go, and it's always good to keep that in mind. It's not to say you shouldn't let go of everything, especially if it causes pain or if there's no way to stop it from being taken away from you. Change is difficult for everyone. Even the ones who go with the flow will be affected at some point one way or another because life comes for us all and will make us feel miserable at one point or another. But while you may have to let go of certain things as you grow older, your love for other things like hobbies, dreams, and even memories of important people who've majorly impacted your life don't have to simply vanish or be hidden away, and sometimes you may even rediscover and reconnect with them. It's a good thing to remember and cherish the things that make you happy. It can be the hardest thing to realize you can't hold on to something forever. Sometimes you have to let it go. But of the things you let go, you'd be surprised what makes its way back to you. This is the heart, the core if you will, I actually need to be shot of Matt Braley's Amphibia. If you've been at all active in the cartoon community since 2018, it is legitimately impossible to not have at least heard the show being mentioned in passing. And if your name is Cartoonchi, do not search the word Amphibia in your comments section, the worst mistake of my life. I remember seeing the very first reveal of the show at San Diego Comic-Con and immediately being intrigued, and it along with Dana Terrace's The Owl House have been the main talk of the cartoon community for a few years now, especially as they've now approached their end rather quickly. But unlike The Owl House, which I needed some time and a bit more understanding of the show before I learned to love it during season 2, I was on board with Amphibia from the start. It's not my favourite of the two today, but I was instantly charmed by the show's sense of humour, its brilliant animation, and its somewhat relaxed slow burn pacing compared to the rapid plot development you would see in other shows. And the majority of those episodes weren't even filler. I'm sorry, man. Now, Amphibia Season 1 is still very much a Season 1, as in there's not very many tightly written character moments or massive story reveals, which I feel is a reason why some people were turned away from this show. Given Matt Braley was a director on Gravity Falls, a show that refuses to not be leached for relevancy in online cartoon discussions, and I wonder what that's for, I imagine many came in expecting a similar experience and that Amphibia would set up more mysteries or raise the stakes higher, but it's clear that Amphibia is not trying to be Gravity Falls, and what it wants to be is a show that carries on some familiar themes and lessons and weaving them into a show that's a lot more lighthearted than episodic, with a serialized and darker plotline slowly boiling beneath the surface. Something Matt has gone on record with is stating that episodes that appear to be filler shouldn't be skipped, as they can provide many of their own little moments that don't appear to be much on the surface but can carry so much weight in later episodes, and I find it hard not to agree. But then again, why do fans of Gravity Falls, Star vs, Adventure Time, in fact a lot of fans of serialized cartoons, why do they have a problem with Amphibia's execution when their shows have done the same thing? This is a question I raised as I rewatched the show for this video, as I too had similar thoughts going into season 2 and 3 despite really liking the show. And I think it may have something to do with not only the pacing but also the quantity of these moments in the midst of otherwise inconsequential episodes. Two very ambiguous critiques that I'll elaborate on as we move forward. But I've often found people either over-exaggerate how much of the F slur is in Amphibia or majorly undersell it. It's not like these critiques came out of a place of hatred for the show anyway, because in reality a lot of people really love what Amphibia has going for it, and the glimpses of more complex stories and character arcs that we receive through the journey. The flimsy and unequal friendship dynamic between Anne and Sasha and Marcy is hinted at as early as the second episode and serves as the connective tissue for most of the narrative conflict, exploring a side of friendships and the toxic mindset of the individuals who engage with it, and how they struggle with maintaining an honest friendship with their own desire for control. It's those little moments that people want more of, and I could understand it being frustrating, not getting it sooner. As the show progressed, it began to show a lot more promise, especially going into season 2 when it came to world building and character writing, which is where I think most people actually hopped on the Amphibia train to begin with. And now it's the only frog pun you're going to get. We got to see more episodes that move the plot forward while having a decent balance of the episodic stuff. Season 2 was a best of both worlds scenario, and rewatching it after the show has ended gives me a lot of appreciation for just how well done it really is. Season 2's finale was an absolute explosion compared to anything the show had done before. It was tense, it was impressively animated, had a larger scope, and it satisfied pretty much everyone while throwing in some of the most heartbreaking and shocking moments I've seen broadcasted on the Disney Channel. Generally speaking, if your finale is so dark that Disney manages to let you get away with a content warning before the episode airs, You've done quite enough to earn my respect and interest. It's a show that generally likes to take its time with heavy story content and meaningful character development, and most of the episodes end up being episodic. But when Amphibia goes for the kill of its story, it ranks among some of the best cartoons Disney has ever greenlit. It was about here that I realized precisely why season 3 ended up being so divisive, because until the story picked itself back up, the rest of the series just did not compare to that ending, and at times I felt like there were two stories trying to be told at once with very conflicting goals and tones. Both sides were often incredibly solid as far as TV shows go, but now they had an audience of people who wanted them to go even further now that the status quo had seemingly been changed. Regardless of people's thoughts, it's generally agreed that the show ended very well and on its own terms, which is an incredibly rare feat in this day and age, especially in the world of televised animation, which is sort of going through a rough patch right now. I sure do love my monthly reminder of living in a corporate dystopia. Thank you, Zaslav, you turbo cunt. And given how much of an impact Amphibia's ending had, along with it validating my many feelings of pure spite, I decided now was time to finally do a retrospective, getting into the nitty-gritty of what made the show so special, from its characters, how the story is structured, as well as its themes, while also doing my best to address many of the show's criticisms and offering a few of my own. Because while I can absolutely rant about how much I love what this show does right and why people should watch it, stream it, show and die and live for it, do you want to borrow my Disney Plus account? It'll change your life! But I ultimately want this to be fair. Also, Owl House is coming back soon. Okay, never mind. So I thought I might as well get this out of the way while I can, because oh my god, Disney is on suicide watch. That is just amazing. I present to you Amphibia, a retrospective. If I say something you disagree with, then hey, it's cool, man. You can say it's no big deal.
It's no big deal, yeah, no big deal. Find a way to start again. The shot the blood and make some friends. It's no big deal, yeah, no big deal. I feel at home in a place that shouldn't be real. Crazy things, but it's no big deal.
Season 1 tends to get a wide range of responses from people. Not all of them are negative, but the season has a variety of strengths and weaknesses that either make or break the show for people, and it's often a barrier that prevents people from pushing forward onto the truly great parts of the show. The show actually starts in an interesting way, introducing us to Amphibia, the planters, and the other residents of Wartwood first, as opposed to Anne, the series protagonist. And it actually doesn't focus a whole lot on the events leading up to Anne and her friends being stranded in Amphibia until later points of the show, immediately leaving us intrigued as to what the music box that transported them here is, as well as its importance, why they decided to use it, where Sasha and Marcy ended up, etc, etc. Many of these crumbs of information leading up to the opening of the music box are important parts of the character arcs for the girls, and the show does a fantastic job of creating an opening that hooks the viewer right away, throwing them into a world of talking frogs and vicious wildlife they know next to nothing about, much like Anne, and introducing us to Anne as the only human character to hold on to and relate to for the time being, at a later point for the episode. Excuse me for big braining this as if this is some sort of college thesis, I just escaped from there, but I like how our confused view of Amphibia mirrors Anne's, and how both us and Anne find someone to connect to after stumbling through the world on our own for a bit. We gather so much from this first episode, most of which is implied, but it's a very effective opening. Unfortunately, Amphibia doesn't really follow up on any of the things it set up for a while, choosing to take a slow burn approach to its storytelling. Now, I am something of a mentally ill person myself, which is why I actually enjoy a lot of slow burn stories and tend to prefer slower pacing when it's not agonizingly boring. As I've said a few times before, Steins Gate is like my favorite thing ever made. I think it's basically perfect. And as a slow burn story that similarly makes or breaks the show for people, as the first 12 episodes are all about setup before it suddenly explodes. Now, I'm not about to compare Amphibia Season 1 to bloody Steins Gate, because that's equivalent to asking a straight A student and a satisfactory art student to study trigonometry without killing each other, but Amphibia's slow burn is a lot more focused on telling more simple stories that teach the characters lessons in a painstaking manner that's not too dissimilar to a lot of Disney shows for kids. Many of the lessons are fine, often they complement the endings for specific episodes pretty well and elevate them rather nicely, like Wally and Anne, Toe Tax, Hot Popular, just a few examples. But a large number of episodes will feel samey and predictable, and this wouldn't be a problem if the show was mainly targeted at kids and wanted to stick with its identity as an easygoing kids show. But we know from the first episode, the crumbs of plot regression we receive and with everything we get involving Sasha this season, that's not what it wants to be. Amphibia is a show that wants to be enjoyable for the whole family the way many of its contemporaries are, yet seems to struggle with keeping a consistent tone or way of writing its episodes to be less ham-fisted. It clearly has its adult audience in mind, there's no mistaking that, and I don't think there's an episode of season 1 that's outright bad or unenjoyable. But it's a problem the show will continue encountering as we go into later seasons, and it hurts Amphibia's overall quality and its storytelling. Another thing to bring up is that most people tend to be frustrated with Amphibia not just due to the quantity of its episodic episodes, but also how many of them contain crucial character moments, and insights into their own struggles and backstories. And there are plenty of little influential moments that make a more cohesive and fulfilling whole as the show's conclusion draws near. These moments are great, but the episodes surrounding them tend to be just fine or have a lot of the previously mentioned problems. And if you have to make sure a viewer watches every episode for a single moment, especially when their patience is already being put to the test, it can cause them to lose interest. I fully agree with watching episodes that seem episodic but have very important character and story moments. I don't think they should ever be truly skipped just because they aren't oozing with plot. But there's a larger quantity of it in many of the shows Amphibia's viewers came from, and even when there wasn't as much of it as other episodes, they could usually be carried by their appeal towards the whole family. But Amphibia, as already mentioned, has lots of episodes that feel more geared towards kids, so stuffing those moments in episodes that older audience members may feel they're too old to be watching is a little bit of a problem. Season 2 has far less of this problem, but it's not the last, nor the worst we'll see of it. But other than that, Season 1 is pretty decent. I can't knock the show's sense of humor. It's always got this morbid edge to it, and the comedic timing is straight up excellent. It's a very charming style of telling jokes that carries a lot of the Gravity Falls DNA you would expect from a show made by Matt Braley, and the tone is always light enough to the point of it never being distracting or taking away from any scenes. When the show wants to be heartfelt, it will simmer down for a moment, which really helps with later seasons. The planters encapsulate these words, often being the funniest and most heartwarming parts of Amphibia. While they don't develop much outside of having smaller bits of growth, like Hop Pop accepting Anne, Sprig deepening his bond with Anne, and Polly, okay, not Polly, but she's still my favourite, they all serve their purpose and at many points exceed it. They're fleshed out and entertaining side characters who get as much necessary focus as Anne does, especially Sprig, with his friendship with Anne allowing her to see past Sasha's manipulation and stand up for herself. Just solid characters all around. God bless Bill Farmer.
I don't feel safe.
The show's first season has this really chill and serene vibe to it that the others don't really have. Now that's more than likely a consequence of nothing fucking happening, but it gives the show a certain identity and it's a relatively easy watch. You can understand why this is many people's comfort show. Helping with this a lot is the end credits, which plays a somber acoustic rendition of Anne's theme, accompanying Anne and Sprig reading amid the late evening atmosphere. A beautifully melancholic piece that perfectly represents her character and growth throughout the series, displaying her happiness and love for the world of Amphibia and the many new people she's met on her journey, while lamenting over being worlds apart from her parents and home life. It's a relaxing piece of music filled with emotion and a perfect way to cap off each episode. On that note, let's talk about Anne. Anne is much more of a grounded protagonist than I expected her to be. Typically with shows where characters get teleported to another world, I just know people are gonna flip when I call a western cartoon an isekai. They're helped by the presence of an energetic or slightly eccentric protagonist, like Luz from the Owl House as an example. Anne, in comparison, still has her fair share of spunk, but she's not bouncing off the walls of energy and seems to have an easy time taking in her new surroundings and becoming accustomed to them. Something she does share of Luz though is that she is a walking, talking screw-up for a lot of Season 1. She makes a lot of mistakes in Season 1 and in later episodes due to lapses in her own judgment, but she more than often makes up for it and shows a lot of newfound maturity towards the end of Season 1. I used to be pretty harsh on Luz for messing up a lot, something I greatly exaggerated, so I don't want to let my frustrations with a character constantly messing up cloud my judgment. But Anne does end up repeating some of her missteps, like not listening to Hop Pop even when he wants to help her, even when there's ways of doing what she wants to do that are far more reasonable. You get the idea. It's not a massive issue, but there's only so many times you can watch a character make a mistake by not listening to someone that before it gets a little tiring in my opinion. But for the few of Anne's qualities that I dislike, she's ultimately a likable character who shows plenty of courage in the face of danger. And to add on to this, her growth in Season 1 is something I was always invested in after hearing her say this line in the episode Best Friends.
Look, if a friend likes a pencil case, you get it for them. If your friend likes your new shoes, you give them to her. And if a friend wants you to steal a crazy music box from a thrift store, even if you really don't want to, you do it, okay? Because if you don't, they might not want to be your friend anymore.
This is a very well written piece of dialogue. It's automatically meant to turn the cogs in your brain because most people know that what Anne's saying isn't true, and even she seems to doubt it. We can immediately infer that something's not quite right with her friendship group between her, Marcy, and Sasha. I'll get to Sasha sooner or later, don't worry. But Anne learns to overcome these flawed notions of what friendship is throughout Season 1, notably for her bond with Sprig, but also Hop Pop and Polly and the rest of Wartwood as she gains their trust and respect, standing up for the town in face of the Toad Army. And when she finally reunites with Sasha, whose controlling and manipulative qualities have led her down a path of villainy in Amphibia, she finally has the courage to stand up to her and refuse her demands, fighting for the newfound family and friends she cherishes in Amphibia over the lifelong manipulative friendship she's had with Sasha. But at the end of the day, she still cares for Sasha, and she still considers her a friend somewhat. She wants to be on better terms. She wants Sasha to recognize that she can't keep everyone under her control, and that's why despite everything, threatening the lives of her family and friends and all, she reaches out to her as Toad Tower crumbles, with the song Lean On Me swelling in the background, which is a really nice touch. But Sasha, still genuinely caring for her, knows that she's done Anne wrong, and upon taking a look at the new bond she's made, it tells Anne that she's better off without her, and lets go. From this moment on, Anne Anne would continue to grow throughout the series and would learn to be braver and more comfortable with herself. She's fully come into her own in Amphibia despite having her shortcomings and still being easily manipulated. Anything else I have to say about Anne will be included in my praises for the other seasons, as most of her development does happen in season 1. It's just that her character is reinforced in later episodes, so her growth doesn't remain stagnant as they move on to Sasha and Marcy. But the main trio's arcs perfectly encapsulate the show's themes of change. Not just general change as life moves on, but personal change and personal growth. Anne grows over the course of season 1 into a more responsible, independent person, cutting back on her laziness and selfishness and putting others before herself. Anne's arc is a lot more straightforward than Sasha and Marcy's, and it works for the show's first season, keeping the ideas and execution simple at first before delving into more complicated stories. But overall, season 1 of Amphibia is pretty decent. It has a lot of problems depending on what you're expecting the show to be, despite it being a solid season of television, and it has trouble establishing and sticking with a specific identity and tone. But the glimpses of greatness we receive in season 1 pave the way for that potential to be unleashed. Season 2 is the best season of Amphibia. I said it. Judging it as a whole, season 2 is a lot more tightly written and strikes that family-friendly balance the previous season struggled with, keeping the episodic episodes but not forcing a lot of new morals to teach Anne and just focusing on being funny and entertaining with some good moments sprinkled within that don't feel like a chore to get to. The episode plots are also generally more interesting than the miscellaneous problem of the week the first season went with for a lot of its episodes. There's a western parody, a noir parody. The noir one was genuinely really good actually. Hot Pop tends to get a good deal when it comes to solo episodes. Swamp and Sensibility was a fun look into Wally, a character we've previously been endeared to in season 1, despite Anne being a bit of a colossal dickhead. And I mean, come on, who doesn't like the Gravity Falls episode? This was such a great love letter to Gravity Falls, and hearing Gruckle Stan's voice again after so long was an absolute delight. It's episodes like these that feel a lot more fun to sit through because they have a lot more of an interesting premise to them, and generally better execution than season 1's episodic stuff. There's also far less of them, with the plot being in motion for a lot more than season 1. While season 1 was a slow burn that I appreciated in concept and overall enjoyed, and season 2 keeps up with the slower pacing compared to other shows, its episodes outside the plot are more interesting, and its episodes with the plot are downright fantastic, with both Anne and the Planters being in unfamiliar environments. There's rarely a moment for any of the characters to be unnaturally lectured, and the morals that are taught are done far more naturally. Some of the episodes just have good messages in general that tie into a sweet and heartwarming ending, like in the episode Hopping Mole, where we get a scene between Anne and Sprig learning about each other's mothers and how much Anne misses hers to the point of going to crazy lengths to procure a present for her. Meanwhile, Sprig rather nonchalantly brings up how his mom died when he was young, and he therefore has no memories of her, wondering how it's possible to miss people you never knew before Anne hugs him. An entertaining and interesting episode ending with a pretty large emotional payoff. Not every episode needs to be this emotional, obviously. In fact, I'll be blunt right now, this really caught me off guard and actually got to me quite a bit, but it helps that the wait for these character moments is far less egregious. Season 2 is mostly episodic with a side of story until we get to episode 6, and are finally introduced to Marcy.
In there. Didn't really stick the landing.
Marcy Wu, the newest addition to the Oops, I Accidentally Wrote an Autistic Character Club, is my favorite character by far. Marcy easily got the best deal when it came to being stranded in Amphibia, compared to Anne and Sasha. Whereas Anne was left in the wilderness and lived in a rural town far removed from her life on Earth, and Sasha was just straight up imprisoned in Toad Tower, Marcy ended up smack dab in the middle of Newtopia, a vibrant and bustling city that's home to Amphibia's king, Andreas, whom she quickly befriends and becomes his assistant advisor, going on a number of adventures and working directly for King Andreas. She's also a Scrinkly Scrunkly, Autismo Scrimblow. Her high energy and nerdy enthusiasm does a great job of making her endearing right off the bat, and her unapologetic clumsiness just seals the deal personally. A+ character. Season 2 would have been a 10 out of 10 if Marcy had more scenes, I'm just saying. Marcy doesn't have much of an arc in season 2 until the very end, but there's a lot of neat little details to infer about her from the episodes she's in. But I'll leave that for later, because holy wow, I have a lot to say about Marcy, like a lot. This season we get to see a variety of new locations in Amphibia outside of Wartwood and Newtopia, and we also gain new information on the music box and the colored gems that act as its power source. Since transporting the girls to Amphibia, the energy from the gems has been depleted, and so Anne, the Planters, and Marcy must venture out and locate the 3 temples that are able to recharge the stones, each providing a series of tests for those who enter. Once the gems are charged and placed onto the box, the girls can be taken back home. Season 2 does a great job of fleshing out the world of Amphibia beyond Wartwood, adding plenty of new lore and implications that are just a total tease for someone like me who loves writing about that sort of stuff. As for the temples themselves, they're they're fun episodes in their own rights. Not sure why the first temple gets a full 20-minute episode, but we'll get there. And we see when the gems are charged in each of the episodes that the colors green, blue, and red drain from Marcy, Anne, and Sasha's eyes, respectively. Keen-eyed viewers may have noticed in previous episodes that there are blink and you'll miss it moments for Anne, Sasha, and Marcy where their eyes glow blue, green, and red, symbolizing their connection to the Calamity Box and the so-called prophecy. Yes, I groaned too. Don't worry, it's really not that much of a problem. This is a really nice detail, they kept that since the first season, so when Anne leaves her gem half charged instead of letting it drain her energy completely, it serves as a bit of decent foreshadowing knowing that these gems contain a lot of power and continues to add to the impressive amount of world building Season 2 has managed to contain within only 20 episodes. Even when the plot is put on hold to give us some episodic stuff, again, they're leagues better than the stuff from Season 1, it serves as a nice break when we go for a few story episodes in a row, showing how good this season is at pacing itself. As for the rest of the character development this season, most of it comes from Sasha and Grime to an extent. They've gone from opportunistic partners to genuine friends, respecting each other's bravery and strength, with Sasha admitting that her constant training was that she didn't end up losing Grime like she did Anne. And once Sasha reunites with Anne and Marcy, while she at first sees no issue of manipulating them once more, she shows on plenty of occasions that she still cares about the two and sees them as genuine friends to her, but is unable to hold back her tendencies as a control freak, which led to their friendship being so toxic in the first place, and is ashamed for doing so. Even when she's supposed to be manipulating Anne and Marcy, she still shows moments of genuine remorse for her actions, and at times the stuff she's saying, which admittedly seem to be manipulative when Grime reveals that she's being manipulative, feel incredibly genuine compared to everything else she's done. Sasha's got her own section soon. I know I've said that a lot, but don't worry, I'll get there. Hop Hop and Anne have their own turmoil when Anne finds out Hop Hop lied about sending the Calamity Box to his special contacts, when in actuality he just buried it outside after reading about how dangerous it was. And the fact that the box has seemingly disappeared on top of this completely shatters Anne's trust in Hop Hop, but forcing him to explain his reasoning beyond finding it to be dangerous, explaining it when he was out adventuring one day, a group of herons attacked Wartwood, killing Sprig and Polly's parents in the process and leaving him to blame himself, and forbidding any adventures he deemed to be dangerous to protect his family, which now includes Anne. Even after this episode ends on a sweet note and Anne has forgiven Hop Hop for his actions, the problem itself hasn't just been suddenly mended, as the two find it difficult to discuss things between each other. They spend most of their time in the first temple trying to awkwardly reconnect and then arguing, before Anne tells him that she just needs to have some time to herself for a bit. Given the show's previous handling of self-contained, smaller arcs in certain episodes, I fully expected them to just drop this stuff when Hop Hop revealed the truth about Sprig and Polly's parents, but to my surprise, they portrayed a realistic conflict rather well and didn't just let it end within one episode. It adds plenty of depth to Hop Hop, but it also does a good job of not letting Anne remain stagnant now that the bulk of her development has been achieved. There are other characters like Sprig and Polly who get their own smaller victories, but nothing major outside of Sprig and Anne's little moment in Hopping Mall. As for King Andreas, we're made aware that he's putting plans into motion behind the scenes from the beginning, but we never truly know the extent of them or what his motivation is, which helps the twist reveal of him being a villain work much better than a lot of other Disney villains who can seemingly flip from being the brave little toaster to Hitler within a single scene, with little to no build-up. Andreas is formally introduced to us as a gigantic imposing figure, complementing our idea of what he looked like in our previous teaser, and then he just turns out to be an insanely goofy and jovial guy. We get later glimpses of Andreas' plans, so we know he's going to be revealed for who he truly is at some point, but by the time he finally reveals his plans, he's still a total goofball, and I love that about Andreas. It makes him such a fun villain since he can be tyrannical and imposing, but keeping up a gleeful attitude because that's just who he is. He was never putting on much of an act, but merely disguising his true intentions. His true colors is an absolutely spectacular season finale. Oh my god, my voice. Okay, pro tip. Always drink water before you record because you'll end up talking like that a lot. True Colors is an absolutely spectacular season finale that manages to accomplish so much within such a short amount of time. Well, I mean, it's 22 minutes long, it's standard fare, but still. Continuing to poke at Anne and Sasha's conflict, thwarting the Toad Army and Sasha despite them inadvertently doing them all a favor, and discovering Andrews' true nature, turning their selfish invasion into a desperate struggle to keep Andrews out of power before enacting his plans. And once that fails, Andrews reveals who his ancestors really were, which, let's be fair, he wasn't really doing a good job at keeping a secret.
Apparently, my ancestors used it to visit entirely different worlds. They were peaceful explorers, scientists if you will.
And vows to invade Earth and strip it of its resources so he can continue conquering worlds and bring back Newtopia's former glory. As Marcy begs and pleads for him to stop, not realizing the extent of Andrews' evil when assisting him with his plan, Andrews decides to reveal to Anne and Sasha that Marcy was the one to strand him in Amphibia on purpose. At the start of the episode, we flash back to the day the girls went missing, and we see Marcy was reading a book containing Bill Cipher! Bill Cipher! In Amphibia! Real, but the book also contained a page about the Calamity Box, revealing its ability to travel to other worlds. Now to go off topic for a second, admittedly this book, Dr. P's Extraordinary Guide to Magic and Mystery, is kind of a loose end. It's heavily implied to be of amphibian origins and somehow found its way to Earth, but it's barely explained and it's honestly just a massive plot contrivance-y, plot device-y thing left for theorists to interpret. You know, unless I'm a fucking idiot. Never mind how it's in Marcy's school and how she read it the exact day she found the box itself, but I'm not gonna dunk on a story coincidence if it's the reason for their show starting. That's pretty much how every show or story starts, pretty much. Just felt it was a little lazy compared to the rest of the show's writing. Anyways, after Marcy reads this book, she receives a text from her parents who then tell her that her father has gotten a new job out of state, meaning they have to move away and Marcy will have to leave Anne and Sasha behind. In her distress, she runs off and finds a shop with the Calamity Box on the shelves, informing Sasha that she just found the perfect birthday present for Anne. Marcy couldn't cope with the sudden change and having to leave her lifelong friends behind, and in an act of desperation to cling on to them, had them all open the box, not even knowing if it would work, just so they could have a chance to stay together. Both Anne and Sasha are in disbelief as Marcy attempts to justify her actions, knowing there's no way to fix what she's done with mere words, explaining to Anne and Sasha how much they've grown, the adventures they've had, but it doesn't leave her justified. It leaves her broken. She acted out of selfish but good intentions to cling on to the people she loves, afraid of change. But at the end of the day, she knowingly got her friends stranded in another world for over half a year, and reality hits Marcy hard.
I found the box. I had no idea that it would actually work, but it did. And it sent us to a place where we'd never have to grow apart, where the three of us could be friends forever together. Look at how much fun we've had. Look at how much you've both grown. Look at Sprig. I gave you this. I gave you everything. I just didn't want to be alone.
Despite Sasha and Marcy's mistakes, they and Anne still recognize that Andrews is a threat and needs to be stopped. The end of True Colors is one of the most explosive finales I've ever seen in animation, period. The stakes are incredibly high, emotions are an all-time high, and the animation is fucking gorgeous. The moment where Sprig is tossed out the window and Anne summons the remaining power left within her from the blue gem and absolutely wrecks shit, it's lovely. When Amphibia reaches its high points, it is absurd how great this show is. It just triumphs over literally everything. It's not just because the moment is hype, but because it feels earned, it feels satisfying. If Amphibia was just as great as season 2 was throughout its entire run, I think it would be one of my favorite animated shows, period. But even after that undeniably brilliant action scene, the episode is still dead set on ending with a second bang. What could they do to possibly top it all off? Well...
Now look what you've made me do.
Marcy says she's sorry, Marcy collapses, and Anne is taken back to Earth with the planters, with no way back. Roll credits. That is how you end a season with everyone in shock. True Colors is still the best episode of the show, I'd say, without a doubt. Now that we've gotten it out of the way though, let's talk about Marcy. I have a lot to say about Marcy. She's my favorite character by a country mile, but I think it's a good time to talk about her actions in True Colors. Marcy, before winding up in Amphibia, was very dependent on other people. Despite her intelligence and quick wit, she was very oblivious to the world around her, and often got herself hurt or in harm's way due to her clumsiness. Both Anne and Sasha feel the need to watch out for her, with Anne specifically still feeling the need to do so in episode 6 upon reuniting with her, which lets us know just how much she's had to watch out for Marcy back on Earth. Marcy has also said that Sasha used to call the shots in their friend group and she would often rely on her and wasn't very good at making independent choices. Due to this over-reliance on her friends, it helped her feel closer to them at the same time, and she's been living most of her life with them by her side to help her and be there for her. So even when she learns to be more independent while stranded in Amphibia, the time she spent with her friends over her life has still led to her being incredibly attached to them on top of caring for them in general. Marcy is also shown to want acceptance from others and to be generally accepted for who she is, and doesn't take it very well when people don't do so, as displayed in the episode New Wartward where she goes to insane lengths to try and gain the town's respect. A person like that having two close friends, seemingly the only friend she has, would more than likely be a little clingy when proposed with the idea of moving away from them. Marcy's own selfishness was actually a result of Anne and Sasha not really connecting with her interests, leading to Marcy being hyperfixated on them to the point of pure obliviousness. In the first temple, she gets so wrapped up in trying to win the game that she doesn't realize her friends are being put in grave danger. Marcy is emotionally isolated, clinging to people and desperately trying to stay with them while they ignore her needs. experience. This all culminates when she obtains the Calamity Box. Being incredibly interested in fantasy role-playing, D&D, RPGs, all that stuff doesn't help things, but her desperation to keep her friends close to her by forcing those interests on them was simply a severe escalation of a number of problems she's been bottling up all this time. Despite her intentions being pure and honestly loving Anne and Sasha, she wanted to stay with them forever, refusing to grow up or move on with the inevitability of change. It was an extreme reaction, but it was still a human reaction from a deeply troubled kid. She didn't take into account how her friends would feel and react to the idea, or even what she would be taking from them. And this realization hits Marcy the second she begins to try and rationalize her actions, but she realizes she can't. She's been tired of feeling alone her entire life, and now she just doesn't want to be alone. I find it impossible to hate Marcy for what she did despite how bad it was. I felt disappointed and frustrated, but that's what you're supposed to feel, I think. The answer isn't as simple as Marcy had good intentions so is therefore exempt from consequences, and it's not that Marcy is a terrible person who should be condemned and further isolated. Amphibia's main cast is the opposite of black and white. Each of the girls have their own gigantic flaws, some more self-destructive or hurtful than others, but at their hearts they're just heavily misguided kids going through so many different emotions, with a number of reasons behind their actions. That's how a lot of people in real life end up screwing up, actually, and in our anger we'll always try and nail it down to a single point. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't, and this does not ever excuse a person's actions, especially if they've done something genuinely criminal or outright malicious. Amphibia portrays a group of kids in an uneven friend group whose actions have a ripple effect on how they view the world and how they act in the future. Anne's misguided notions of friendship, Sasha's manipulative tendencies, and Marcy's selfishness after years of having her needs neglected. And in Amphibia they all face these parts of themselves and strive to grow from them. Anne got there a lot earlier than the others, but that's just the life of a Disney protagonist. And season 3 is where Sasha and Marcy finally come to terms with their actions and emerge as better people. We'll get there. Marcy is going through the motions of change, again tying into the show's central theme, but unlike Anne, where it was a lot more clear-cut, Marcy has been dealing with and bottling up many of her issues after years of neglect from her friends, of which she's grown attached to, and she isn't content with letting them go and moving on to the next part of her life. Change is difficult for Marcy, not in terms of her wanting to be a better person, but because of how scared she is of letting go of people, something she will have to come to terms with in season 3. Now for a brighter topic. Another thing I'd like to talk about in regards to Marcy is the many interpretations of her behavior, namely when it comes to the autism spectrum. Now, it doesn't take a major genius to watch a few episodes with Marcy in them and gather that many of her little habits, info dumping, excitability, I'm not sure if that's a word, her hyperfixations to the point of zoning out of the world around her, poor social skills and high intelligence, all of these put together are all pretty well recognized traits for someone with high functioning ASD or ADHD. And speaking as someone on the spectrum, I picked this up about Marcy from the moment she appeared on screen. I feel there's a bit of a blur between the lines of writing a hyperactive intelligent character and writing an autistic character, and I think Marcy is smack dab in the middle of that blurred line, seeing as this wasn't actually intentional. Matt confirmed that Marcy was not written with this interpretation in mind, but what I think is really cool about this is that it's not a wrong interpretation, and he's not opposed to the idea of this interpretation, and is supportive of those who see a part of themselves in Marcy. I just think it's really cool that the creator of a show notices their fans are headcanoning something off of pretty substantial evidence, and instead of stating it's outright wrong, just tells us that Marcy should be viewed in any way that makes people happy. That's not to disregard Amphibia's canon, but a lot of her traits and her line of thinking when it comes to her actions can actually be used to validate this theory, and I do personally headcanon that Marcy is autistic or has ADHD. Just a little something I wanted to throw in because there's a lot about how Marcy's written that I love and really appreciate. With all of this finally out of the way, let's discuss season 3. Season 3 is without a doubt the most divisive season, and many of the complaints aren't unfounded. There are a large variety of problems that Season 3 faces when it comes to tonal consistency, pacing, structure, and brings back many of Season 1's less desirable traits. Would I call it bad overall? Absolutely not, there are far worse, believe me. But first let's go over the positives. Season 3A, despite not being super filled with plot, has plenty of very enjoyable episodes while still edging the story forward ever so slightly. I thought a lot of the Earth episodes were far more interesting and funny than many of Season 1's episodes, and the show has pretty much passed the point of needlessly lecturing the characters with lessons. Eat the rich! Although that does still happen at points. If you're gonna bog down your Spider-Man parody of actual talking points that people opposed to Spider-Man in the comics use, you may need to be incarcerated. Seeing the Planters interact interact with things on Earth in the reverse scenario to when Anne first arrived in Amphibia makes for a much more interesting season, when we've been seeing Anne interact with and eventually get used to Amphibia over the last 2 seasons. Of course, being on Earth gives us a lot more human characters that are added to the cast, and most of them are likeable enough and serve as fine additions. Although Mr. X certainly overstays their welcome, and I don't think I laughed at a single thing they said once, and it's not as if these episodes are strictly episodic. We frequently flash back to Amphibia and see the total devastation that Andreas has inflicted upon it, rapidly industrializing the landscape with factories and his robot army, his plans to kill Anne, and sometimes keeping us up to date with Marcy's well-being. Olivia and Yunnan is an episode that takes us away from Anne and shows us that Marcy is in fact still alive while not being in the best health, but her escape from the castle is thwarted as she is made into a vessel for the core. The core is the collective minds of Andreas' ancestors all molded into a singular hive mind, and it's a rather terrifying concept for a villain, even more so of how Marcy is integrated with it, which is just Jesus. It is unfortunate then that the core isn't really given much screen time. Even when they integrate with Marcy and become Darcy, who despite being morbidly delightful to watch as an amalgamation of evil minds trapped in the body of a clumsy and nerdy teenager, doesn't show up a whole lot, and I feel there's a lot of missed potential with Darcy. What's here works, don't get me wrong, but something just feels off to me. Pretty vague, I know, but whatever. On top of this, we also finally get to see Sasha at the apex of her development as she steps up to be the leader of the rebellion against Andreas. And yes, I will talk about Sasha, okay, I promise. And seeing Anne getting used to her calamity powers to defend herself and her family is always a visual delight. So while Season 3 doesn't have the best of Season 2's episodic moments or the best of Season 2's plot development, it's still done solidly and moves along fluidly enough to make Season 3A a very enjoyable watch that kept me engaged. And I will just say that the Christmas episode and Escape to Amphibia are up there with some of the show's best episodes. Escape to Amphibia is self-explanatory, but I'm generally just a massive sucker for heartwarming Christmas episodes. Andreas was an absolute delight.
Hey, Andreas! Merry Christmas!
Hey, thanks, you too! Wait, no!
And Rebecca Sugar jump scare. The song is really nice, I like it. There are a few issues I have with 3A though, and that's the obvious issue of the show not really knowing what its identity is. A large problem that people have with Amphibia is that after True Colors, it was expected that the show's status quo would change along with its tone and handling for story episodes. When a story reaches such an incredible high point, it's typically expected to be immediately followed up on, even if that build-up is slow. Amphibia's problem, however, is this. Despite the consequences of True Colors being acknowledged, the show doesn't really take itself too seriously after the fact and immediately brings us back to episodic comedic adventures. And unlike Season 1, which at least had the benefit of including neat character moments in between these episodes, the Sunshine Rainbow Happy Fun Times continue until the end of certain episodes, where it just snaps back to the darker tone and far more interesting story happening on Amphibia, and sometimes it just doesn't happen at all. This is much worse than Season 1's issue, because at least there the stakes and plots of the show weren't firmly established yet, and there were still some good moments in between the adventuring. But Season 3 happens right after the show's rising action reaches its boiling point, and you expect it to be followed up on or for the show to start taking itself more seriously, but it doesn't. I think I read somewhere that these sillier episodes were largely the fault of Disney and their sudden hatred of serialized storytelling, so I don't want to lay it all on the writers. But the finished product is the finished product at the end of the day, and it's still a large problem. And what makes this worse is the show's dedication to splitting its episodes into 10-minute segments as opposed to writing a 20-minute episode. Wow, yes, it's taken me 3 seasons to finally bring this up. Amphibia will sometimes have 20-minute special episodes thrown into a season sporadically, and they're usually reserved for very plot-heavy episodes or season finales. Every other episode is split into 2 segments, 2 different episodes and are each 10 minutes, running in the same 20-minute time frame the show has before starting a new episode after a commercial break. This worked for Season 1 and helped the episodic stuff not drag as much, but when Amphibia does do a full 20-minute episode, the series gets seriously impressive. They can write 20-minute episodes very well, and it's because they have more room to breathe and elaborate and plan out longer, more memorable scenes without the story feeling rushed. Season 2 was a perfect demonstration of this from Marcy at the Gates, The First Temple, and True Colors, each being some of the show's best episodes. And as the show is in its 3rd and final season, the 10-minute segment structure does nothing but actively harm the story in my opinion. It's very impressive what they're able to accomplish in 10 minutes. Anyone who can write episodes this consistently funny within 10 minutes is indeed a skilled writer. But there's a grander story waiting to be told here, and doing 2 shorter comedic episodes with your 20-minute time frame feels like a massive waste to me, and this problem is only accentuated once we get to Season 3B. What the fuck happened with Season 3B? Any sort of momentum this show was carrying beforehand is probably chucked out the window until we get to the final few episodes. As opposed to Season 3A, each episode here is largely story focused, which is a good thing on paper. This is what we've been waiting to see.
Listen, Torp and Torpette, you're not here to pass notes and play footsie. You're here to do a job. These pairings are super important to the mission.
What will I do without you?
I'll miss you every second.
Or so we thought. Despite the setting being grim and Anne and her friends being a part of an actual rebellion against Andreas and the Core, now naming themselves Darcy and keeping many of Marcy's quirks, which admittedly makes them pretty fun to watch, despite this borderline epic backdrop and setting, they still stick to the largely comedic 10-minute segments, and they're just boring. There's no insanely wacky hijinks or anything of the sort, it just feels like the time is being actively wasted with so many of these rebellion activities. Anne is predictably not good at being a leader and insists on not being one, she becomes one, doesn't do it well, back to Sasha. Sprig and Ivy's previously adorable ship moments have become absolutely obnoxious for no reason, and the episode plays out exactly how you think it's going to. And everything involving the Olms ranks among some of the worst content the show has produced. First of all, the way they deal with the drill is fucking hilarious and unnecessary. And second of all, Mother of Olms is the worst episode of the series, hands down. I despise this episode so much. 10 straight minutes of bottom of the nutsack gross out humor that feels completely out of place, only for it to all be meaningless as the task they are doing, restoring Mother Olms' memory, completely fails, and then she forgets that the thing she was going to tell them was written on the fucking ceiling the entire time. Was this episode written over a game of Mad Libs? This is comically stupid. This is Vegemite tier storytelling. So many of Season 3's episodes, not just 3B, I mean 3A too, can be flat out skipped into a specific time frame in the episode so you can catch the one thing worth watching and then move on to the next episode. Not everything should be skipped. I affirm that a lot of 3A's episodes are really funny and worth watching. There's an absurd amount of time wasting here, and if the episode itself isn't interesting, then why should I bother watching it? Especially when I can just skip to any point that's important, get my fill, and then move on to the next episode. Amphibia Season 3 cheat sheet. If you're enjoying an episode, don't skip it. If you aren't enjoying it, then skip to any of the parts that are important and move on. This cheat sheet only applies to Season 3, and you could argue only Season 3B, actually. It's amazing how with less plot, Season 1 does a better job. It's really frustrating how much 3B fumbles most of its episodes, because when 3B is good, it rivals that of Season 2, and sometimes even surpasses it. The Core and the King, while slightly rushed, is a good backstory episode for Andreas, and gives us context for why he's the way that he is. One of his close friends, Leaf, an ancestor of the Planters, stole the Calamity Box, essentially putting an end to years of growth and expansion on the part of his ancestors, and disappointing his father to the grave. His father, Aldrich, was a slimy piece of work, fully content with the conquering of other worlds and wanted Andreas to wipe away any connections or friends he may have, telling him that they'll betray him in due time. When Leaf gets a glimpse of the destruction the box is capable of and what path Amphibia will be led down, she seals it and ultimately breaks the remaining good in Andreas' heart. For centuries now, Andreas has been seeking his father's approval as he speaks to him through the Core, despite not really wanting to be the kind of king his father wanted him to be. Nevertheless, this episode provides some crucial context for Andreas' actions despite its rushed pacing, and it's exactly the kind of story content I wish we got more of in Season 3. The Ulm episodes were such missed opportunities to go really in depth on the prophecy instead of just elaborating on it for 30 seconds and then coming back in the finale to give Anne a Deus Ex Machina power if all the chips are down. There's a reason why Season 3 tends to get largely divisive responses. When it's good, it's great. When it's bad, it's painful. I still like Season 3 overall, do not misunderstand. I think it's an overall good season considering how enjoyable its first half is and how incredible the ending is, but there's so much missed potential here, especially in 3B. Oh yeah, the ending. Well, before we talk about how much of a fantastic conclusion Amphibia had, I think it's time we finally talked about Sasha. Sasha has one of the best arcs on the show, and it's a great redemption story for her. Sasha starts out as a typical popular school bully girl type character that is completely self-centered. Despite being friends of Anne and Marcy, she's the main one calling the shots on pretty much everything they do and has more of an attitude, one that can be rather condescending. She specializes in manipulating people to do what she wants, including her friends, and it has led to her friend group becoming more and more toxic, and her actions and behavior have rubbed off with its own Anne and Marcy, with Anne having a rather foggy idea of what friendship is supposed to be and carries a lot of Sasha's traits in the early days of her friendship with Sprig, getting him to do what she wants, and Marcy developing her own selfishness due to Sasha neglecting her interests. Even on Anne's birthday, we see that Sasha has no problem guilting Anne into coming with her and celebrating celebrating as opposed to being with her parents, mocking the idea of her having a party with them and considering it childish. When the girls end up in Amphibia, Sasha ends up in Toad Tower, eventually earning the respect of Captain Grime after she helps defend the tower. Grime promotes her to his second in command, and given the brutish and commanding nature of the Toad army, this newfound sense of authority given to Sasha meshes too well with her already toxic traits and pushes her to the path of actual evil, seeing no issue with sacrificing Hot Pop to stop political revolutions happening over Amphibia, and seeing the frogs as lesser beings. Anne realizes how much she's been manipulated over the course of her life by Sasha and finally stands up to her and wins their duel. But despite all of her actions, Sasha does genuinely care about Anne and Marcy. She considers them to be her friends. This presents an interesting relationship between the three, as it's once again not all black and white like it was for Marcy. Well, Sasha's actions are really bad, far worse than what Marcy did, but her defeat at Toad Tower and seeing the planters show genuine care towards Anne as they try and pull her back up makes her take a look at herself for a second and realizes how much she's affected Anne, and she's ashamed of it. Not many shows cover a bully character that actually genuinely likes her friends despite doing terrible things to them, and showing her struggle in great detail. It's something I highly commend the show for, because I can't remember the last time I've actually seen this done well, or done at all in the last 10 years. In season 2, she's completely disconnected from Anne until the end, and thus she has to do whatever she can to survive with Grime, who she's now formed a close friendship with. She's still following a dark path, refusing to change and believing Anne is better off without her. Throughout her arc in season 2, we see her genuinely care and show kindness towards those she's formed a bond with, like Percy and Braddock, but ultimately is blinded by her own goals and ignores their wishes, while not liking the fact that there are consequences for her actions when they leave her. When she eventually meets back with Anne and Marcy in the Third Temple, she deceives them throughout the entire episode and shows genuine remorse for doing so. Over the next few episodes, we get the sense that Sasha wants to change for the better, but that she's afraid of doing so, tying into the theme of change present throughout the show, but also restating just how much she truly treasures Anne and Marcy in spite of it all. Battle of the Bands finally teaches her that she doesn't have to always be in control, and it's here where she truly reconnects with her friends after all this time and ends up enjoying herself. So when her previously planned takeover of Newtopia happens, and Anne is understandably hurt and stops giving her second chances, she feels unsatisfied and finally reflects on everything she's done. She's lied and cheated her way through so many chances through no fault but her own, so much so that Anne refuses to believe her when she tells her about Andrew's plans, and this all indirectly leads to Marcy being impaled. All of her actions have finally come crashing down, and she's forced to take a good look at herself in the rubble of the consequences. It's in season 3 where she finally redeems herself, crying upon reading Anne's journal and regretting everything she's done and put Anne through, and now strives to be better, putting the lives of others above her own and finally being selfless, standing up to Andreas and leading the rebellion. Sasha's arc is pretty much Amphibia's version of Zuko's redemption arc in Avatar, and that's not a complaint. While I don't have a whole lot to say about Sasha's arc, it is far more complex than I think most of us were expecting it to be, tying again into the themes of change, showing a character who's afraid of changing in their ways due to their own desires for control clouding their judgment, and not letting them see how badly their actions affect other people, and being afraid of growing from it when it's been their default for so long and doesn't know how to live any other way. Watching her slowly transform from control freak to villain to hero and person worthy of her friends was incredibly satisfying and well planned out, and I wanted to at least get it out of the way before heading into the final 2 episodes, as well as finally coming to a conclusion for this video. All In and The Hardest Thing are 2 of the strongest concluding episodes I think I've ever seen for a cartoon. They take everything that has been built up and manage to deliver on pretty much everything, all the while keeping a brisk pace, a fantastic sense of tension, impactful emotional highs, and some of the best animation I've seen from a Western cartoon in years. If Season 3B lived up to the potential I think most of us expected of it without devolving into straight up filler, yeah, I said it, then Season 3 would unquestionably be Amphibia's strongest, but Season 2 wins out overall due to how good it balances pretty much everything. As for the episodes themselves, well, Anne finally reaches her full potential and completely wrecks Andrews' shit while the world looks on with hope and fear, chanting her name. It's incredibly hype despite having the most corny fucking K-pop music playing in the background, and it somehow enhances the scene. This is the only time you'll willingly catch me praising K-pop, by the way. Sasha confronts Darcy and triumphantly declares that she's changed, defiantly slicing at the cord connecting the core to Marcy's body after it dares to consider her of the same ilk as itself, a manipulator, serving as an incredibly satisfying conclusion to Sasha's arc. And Marcy, despite living living out a fantasy dream within the core, with everything she could have ever wanted, Anne and Sasha, endless adventures, a world where they could live together forever, finally engages with reality and faces herself and what she did to her friends, forcing them to engage with her interests just because they didn't tend to them, and that while it may hurt her to turn down everything she's always wanted, even if it's fake, she comes to terms with the fact that nothing lasts forever, and she ultimately has to let go, not of her love and friendship, but of her desire to never be apart from them, and her childish wishes of holding onto a world where she doesn't have to face reality. Outside the main trio, however, the Planters are also done justice, standing up to the Herons that murdered Sprig and Polly's parents. And then we get to Andreas, a gigantic bundle of daddy issues that shows remorse over the course of the episode and does not enjoy the takeover. But we find out that despite it all, he really wasn't ever putting on much of an act when we first met him. He genuinely liked and cared for Marcy, being instantly charmed and endeared to her, reminding him a lot of his friend Leaf before she left with the box centuries ago. In fact, it's largely implied that Marcy's presence helped bring back the goofier and happier side of Andreas that he had been keeping under wraps for so long due to his father's burden. The presence of a friend does wonders for him, and his first meeting with Marcy is even more wholesome with that framing in mind. This could have been the first time he's genuinely laughed and enjoyed himself in years, bringing back the old Andreas prior to Leaf's betrayal. We even see that the core initially considered killing Marcy upon Andreas meeting her, and that all of this time Andreas was actively buying time for Marcy and her friends, even if he rationalized it to the core as being part of a larger plan. He's even visibly shocked at the proposition of killing her, reminding the core that she's just a child, and genuinely considering if their actions are overblown. All of Andreas' heinous actions have been the result of his father and the core twisting his mind and burying his old loving self beneath mountains of insecurity and shame for losing the box, and halting his family's progress. He has only ever sought his father's approval, never standing up for himself. Not as if he could either, given the core can mind control him to do their bidding. Then in the middle of his fight with Anne, Sprig delivers Andreas the final letter Leaf wrote for him that they had found in the Planter's home a few episodes prior, expressing how Leaf found newfound beauty in her new life after she embraced the change, but never stopped loving Andreas and the memories they made when they were kids, choosing to grow up and go along with change, but never letting go of the important memories and feelings that she's always cherished, knowing that the real Andreas is still there deep down, and implores Andreas to not make the same mistake of closing himself off to others. The letter, while being redundant for Andreas, is enough for him to realize how far he's gone and how many mistakes he's made his entire life. He realizes that he can't take back all the horrible things he's done. There's no going back. But what he can do is face the consequences and change for the better. Andreas was never a villain, but was manipulated into acting like one to serve the best interests of someone he should have stood up to a long time ago. And as Sasha defeats Darcy and relinquishes the core's control over him, he surrenders, with the only thing he wants afterwards, even when he's dying on the floor, being Marcy's safety. All in may not be the most tidy Amphibia episode, being the only episode of the series to go over 40 minutes, and probably being overstuffed with content, but it's well worth it for such an emotionally satisfying string of intense battles and payoffs. The hardest thing, the show's final episode, doesn't have as much to talk about aside from the obvious, but it's still a heartbreaking ending that's perfectly bittersweet. Obviously, the anime fight sequence with all the girls harnessing their power of the stones was absolutely jaw-dropping. The animation is perfect, the music is perfect, and Andreas finally standing up to the core and assisting the girls in saving Amphibia was the closure he needed to show how he's finally changed. Not forgetting his past atrocities, but showing that he's finally done being manipulated, mirroring Anne's own words to Sasha from back in season 1.
Something I should have done a long time ago.
Standing up to you! Full throttle engaged!
Keith David is a national treasure. He's slayed with this fucking role. And then there's Anne's sacrifice. Now, I'm gonna be real, I didn't think Anne was actually going to die, especially with how suddenly introduced this final power she can use to annihilate the core if all else fails. It feels a bit like a Deus Ex Machina, an idea that should have been elaborated on earlier, maybe in the only other episode to feature the prophecy in Mother Ohm? But regardless of that, Anne's sacrifice, all the way from her doing the deed to coming out the other end revived, was simply fantastic, putting her life forward to save everyone she's met on her journey, and the scene where she fades away honestly got me a little bit. The stuff of her meeting the god who brought the stones to mortals to begin with was pretty cool. I'm not gonna lie, reading on a computer that you're talking to a god who has watched over the world for countless aeons would have given me a heart attack. And I mean, Anne's gonna be a god when she dies. How many main characters in a Disney show? How many characters in a show? Like a story, a movie, a fucking, like, a novel. How many main characters in a Disney show? You know what, scratch that. How many characters ever can you name that get a deal that sweet? sweet. And the rest of the episode continues to turn on the waterworks. The goodbye scene at the end is especially impactful, knowing that the show had the balls to do what Star Vs. couldn't. Keep the world separate, embrace that nothing lasts forever, and perfectly tying its themes together with a gorgeous and bittersweet farewell to the characters we've gotten attached to. Each character got an ending they rightfully deserved here, even the minor ones, with everyone living their own happy lives. Olivia and Yunnan are in a happy relationship, Ryan was abandoned his villainous ways, Mayor Toadstool handed down his position to Toadie and is no longer up to his old tricks. Everything just feels right. And over on Earth, we fast forward to 10 years later and get to see Marcy and Sasha all grown up and reuniting. While I would have liked for the episode to be longer, it works too well for me to really consider it a valid complaint. And then we get to the final scene, which reaffirms the beginning statement of the video. Change can be difficult, but it's how we grow. And Sasha and Marcy all overcome their hardships by changing for the better. And on top of changing themselves, they have to adjust to the world around them changing too. It could be the hardest thing, to realize you can't hold on to something forever. Sometimes you have to let it go. But of the things you let go, you'd be surprised what makes its way back to you. As previously mentioned, this is the heart, the core, if you will, of Matt Braley's Amphibia. While you may have to let go of certain things as you grow older, your love for other things like hobbies, dreams, and even memories of important people who've majorly impacted your life don't have to simply vanish or be hidden away, and sometimes you may even rediscover and reconnect with them. It's a good thing to remember and cherish the things that make you happy. Anne and Sprig will always be together, even if they're worlds apart. And Sasha and Marcy will always remember Amphibia and cherish the good memories they made and how they grew. Amphibia's core message is a story that has been told time and time again, yet it's the way they managed to tell it that makes the show stand out. It's no mystery as to why the show is as popular and beloved as it is. When Amphibia is amazing, it's one of the best Disney shows I've ever seen. It's just a shame that it falters at several points and has trouble rebuilding its momentum. But I am so incredibly happy that Matt and the team stuck the landing. Amphibia is not my favorite Disney show, but it's up there with some of the best for me personally. Not just quality-wise, but from how impactful it really was. The show has its flaws. At times it feels like two different shows are both competing for the spotlight, and it can cause the tone and direction of the series to feel confused and aimless. And at times it feels like the show wants to have its cake and eat it too. I was originally skeptical of the show upon rewatching it when I wasn't feeling the same things I felt on my first viewing, but after sticking with it, I rediscovered why I loved the show so much, and I just couldn't help myself when it came to sharing it with you all. This video is not my most well polished or structured. I think it can be a bit rambly in places, but I hope you at least enjoyed it or can see where I'm coming from. People have been wanting me to talk about the show for literal years anyway, thought it was just about time. Anything else I want to add may be a bit of a repeat of my Gravity Falls retrospective, seeing as both of these shows cover similar themes, just that Gravity Falls primarily focuses on childhood and growing up more, whereas Amphibia takes that concept of moving on and embracing change in general and bases its entire show on that. So I won't repeat myself here, but I think it's safe to say that I love Amphibia, warts and all. And if you've watched this video and still disagree with me, then, well, thanks for watching the video anyway, man. It's no big deal.
This is your path to be. We're all